and ask if everybody has had a chance to review the minutes of the October 15th meeting and whether anybody has any corrections, additions, or deletions.
Barry, I just have to make one statement for the record. This meeting is being conducted virtually in accordance to the provisions of RSA 91A and Emergency Order Number 12 issued by the governor of the state of New Hampshire. It's being conducted virtually due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is not practical for this advisory board to meet in person, nor is it in the best interest of public health to allow the public to participate that way. However, the public can participate by logging in via the computer link or by calling by phone. If you're calling by phone, you're a member of the public, dial *6, and when you're recognized by the chairperson, you will be allowed to speak at that time or ask any appropriate questions. And Barry, over to you.
Okay, and Sean, I presume that you have the ability as the host to recognize anybody if you see a call in.
I do.
Great, okay. So I'll go back to the minutes if anybody has any comments on those. If not, Lori, are you there?
Hello.
Hello, Victoria? Or
I'm here.
okay, would you like to make a motion to accept the minutes?
Yeah, I was waiting. Yeah, I make a motion that we accept the minutes of the October 15, 2019 TIF board meeting.
Great. Okay. And I have present, oh, and Chip, you were present at that meeting, so perhaps you could step in and.
Yes, I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
We have to do a roll call vote.
We'll do a roll call. George is not here. Victoria?
Yes.
I vote yes. Chip?
Yes.
And Peter was not here. Is Peter on the line now?
He is. He's muted himself, though.
Okay, then, well, I think we have.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I've never been on this platform before, so, okay.
Okay, well, you're doing fine. So
Okay.
I'll take that as a unanimous of those people who are voting, Victoria, Barry, and Chip. Sean, are you an actual member or ex officio?
Yeah, I'm a non-voting member of both Tracy and I. So just to be clear, is Peter abstaining because he wasn't here, or?
No, I was in the meeting. I just wasn't sworn at the time. So I concur with the minutes.
Okay.
Then discussion items, and I think this is where maybe more questions than answers from the board at least. Sean, could you explain about the budget and start off with the 2021 budget, and then we can go over to the CIP projects?
Will do. So each year we are required to, well, I am required to present a budget to the council for all matters, including the TIF, the 2 TIF districts we have. And it's up to the TIF advisory board to make a recommendation. You're actually making it to me first because I present the budget to the council and ultimately to the council. And that's the document that I sent out to the budget lines, at least as they are presently, and also the revenues that have been received thus far. So the first half of the tax year, we received $41,997. And that is based upon new increment, that being mostly the Geocon building.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So that's where that's coming from. That's a $3 million structure that was built over there. So
Yeah.
So that's the only new increment really that we have. We also had some couple of losses for exemptions that have occurred. So that's what it totals out to right now at 41,997. That's first half. And I'll bring up the sheet here in just a second. I'll share that with you. So if you can see that, you'll see where we're at 41,997. Those of you who may or may not be familiar with government accounting, because it's a revenue, it shows the balance is a negative. Whereas if it's an expenditure, it shows it the other way. So don't be misconstrued by that. So that's the first half tax bill. Now that represents the increased value in the TIF district, mostly Geocon, and again, some losses. And that is the total tax that is received for that new increment. That means the school portion, the county portion, and the city portion all goes into the TIF account. That is your balance at present. The second half tax bill is going to be a bit more tricky. The reason why I say that, we're going through a revaluation, and by September 1st, the new values will be placed in there. Now, there won't be any new increment with that, because the new increment was captured anything that was on the ground on April 1st. But there is going to be an increase in increment due to the fact that the values changed on the existing properties. So in one way, I suppose you could, as the TIF advisory board, you would look at that as a positive thing. But on the other hand, on the city side, that's a negative thing. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because there's no new increment there, what you really have is the change in that value. So basically, we would be, for lack of a better term, robbing from the general fund, because that money would normally go to that, and putting it in the TIF fund. So it creates a hole in the school budget, the county budget, and the city budget because of that new change. I call it an artificial change because, again, it isn't true new increment because we've already captured that. So that number.
If I, Barry speaking, that's just the marginal increase from what was before to what's the new assessment. Is that correct?
Exactly. So residential is expected to go up by 10 or 20%, and commercial could be as much as 50%.
And is
Okay.
that by state statute that's counted toward TIF as opposed to kept in the general fund?
Say that question again.
Is that by state statute that's considered that new increment goes into the TIF fund as opposed to being remaining in the general fund?
Right. It just talks about any new increment, any change in value, is what the statute reads.
Right.
But the idea is most TIF districts are, you start out with nothing and then you build something. For instance, the airport TIF district has zero tax value right now because it's government-owned land. When we put something on there, that's going to be truly new increment, no matter what happens. We're in the downtown TIF district, we already have existing tax value, and we're increasing it because the market value has changed, not because there's new increment. Now, there was a little bit of new increment, and that's what we've got here right now. So we just got to remember that when the fall comes. There's already been discussion about taking the delta between the two. So that second half tax bill, some of that is going to be true increment. That indeed should go to the TIF district. And the other portion of that should be used to help offset, say, the debt service on the tunnel project, because there's going to be a hole that's created in the general fund of the city. And there'll be a similar hole in the school budget. On the county side, we're going to have to absorb that because that'll be spread, the city's assessed value will change, and that will be spread across everybody. So if that's a bit complicated, does everybody understand that?
Sean, I have a question that might speak to it a little bit. When you were describing the 41,997, and you said that's mostly from Geocon building coming online, you said a little bit of it is from loss.
Right.
So philosophically, I'm trying to understand where there was a loss and that, and you know, if that reduced the number we're seeing right here.
So any exemptions that occur, whether they be veterans exemptions, elderly exemptions, or there's a whole list of charitable exemptions, and one of them in particular is 10 Parkhurst Street, which is Twin Pines. That's an exempt property because of the housing that's there, the low-income housing that's provided there. So that
was already existing. Why does that get debited against the TIF fund?
It's when it gets captured. If whatever's on the ground on April 1st of every year is what gets captured. So there's a change. So in other words, you take a building on April 1 and you haven't done any renovation to it. You start renovating it and that work is completed in August. We don't capture that till the next April. So it's a year behind before you pick it up.
Sean, Barry here. So in April of 2019, that was a taxable property, but in April of 20, it was not taxable.
Yeah, I believe that's how it worked out. Yeah, the timing.
Okay.
And they applied for the exemption. Yeah.
Right, because it was just an apartment building the prior year.
Right.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. And staying on that same 41,000, is that the tax for the first half that Geocon paid on the building, or
Yes.
roughly?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you also have to remember the very building I'm sitting in right now too, there was an abatement there, a tax abatement there that was approved by BTLA. So those also are going to count against the TIF district.
Right.
So
Okay.
GeoCon paid more than 41,997.
Right.
Okay.
And,
That's
and
just the thing, right?
Say that again?
That's just the increment.
Right.
but the increment was basically 0 to something.
Yes.
Okay. So that puts $42,000 in our TIF account. And theoretically, if we had a $41,000 sidewalk project in the district, we could use that money to put in the sidewalk. Is that correct?
Right. You could make that request to the council to spend that money for that particular purpose.
Okay. But that's our trust fund, I'll call it. We have to spend wisely or recommend wisely and determine projects that as that fund grows, what we might do with it.
Exactly. And remember, the purpose of the TIF district is to be able to create economic value. In other words, it's to use that money to create enhanced economic value.
Right.
This is one of the common problems with TIF districts is they get used for things they're not really intended for. The idea is to match public and private funds as to enhance the economy. Not necessarily just to make improvements, but to enhance the economy, add to the economy.
A catalyst.
Okay, and so, and do we have to spend this now, or can we accrue this till we get more?
Yeah, it's a non-lapsing fund. You accrue it till you decide to, well, the council ultimately decides to spend it.
And Sean, I assume there's been some planning, some thinking on the city's part about what kind of expenditures you have in mind for this
Yes.
money.
Yes, we have a study that was done in 2016, and that talks about the redevelopment of the rear parking lots behind City Hall, and the idea of building parking garages and matching that with a private project at the same time to develop that whole area and allow for adequate parking for the public, and at the same time allow for commercial development to occur in there, adding more increment, adding housing and commercial activity in that area.
Okay.
Was that the primary, were there other potential expenditures, or was that the primary underlying conclusion of that study?
Some of that would have changes in the existing road structure within that area, Flynn Street and Taylor. Those roads would be changed, at least under that conceptual plan they had back in 2016.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Victoria here. So I hear what you're saying about the parking behind City Hall and joint commercial and parking development, et cetera. And I recall when we had our earliest meetings that one of the things that you threw out when we talked about 20 Spencer Street was how those TIF funds could be used to service the bond that we might have to incur to do the infrastructure on Spencer Street. So that's no longer an option, or that's no longer being considered?
Well, no, we'll talk about that when we talk about the next item, CIP projects, and I'll go through that project with you, where that stands.
Okay. All right, so then am I clear that what we're talking about with this 41,997 is either now or in the future is for the improvements behind City Hall?
Well, again, that was the conceptual plan for the study that was done in 2016. It'll be up to
Okay.
the people today, that being you folks, to make a recommendation for whatever it is you deem appropriate, and ultimately up to the council, whoever they may be at the time, as to how those public funds are to be spent. That was a conceptual idea, and the city was never, there was nothing binding on the city to do the things that came out of that visioning study. But that was what the public had looked for and talked about at that particular time.
So Victoria,
Okay.
these are funds in the bank that we're saving, and then we will look at various projects and make a recommendation to the city council.
Oh, absolutely. I understand that.
Good. Okay.
So,
So this is really an interim accounting of where we stand today and how we got there.
yes.
Good, good.
And then any interest we gain on that will show up in there as well, and any other miscellaneous revenue, whether it's donations or grants or things like that, that's what would show up on the existing lines in there. So for those of most of you are probably familiar with government budgets, there's two sides. There's the revenue, projected revenues, and then there's the actual expenditures, appropriations that you might have on a project. So these are right now the present revenues that we have. We don't have a predicted revenue because we don't know what that reval is going to show, what that's going to look like, and we won't know until September 1. So shortly after September 1, we're definitely going to want to meet again to see what that number looks like for that tax warrant that's going to go out in the fall.
Good, good.
So the next item on your screen, I know Victoria, you can't see this. It's the
No, I printed the agenda. I've got it here.
Okay, so it's really the second page of that. And those are the budget lines we created for the TIF district, at least for now. We can certainly add more if we need to, but these follow a standard guideline here, Government Accounting Standards Board. On the left-hand side, those series of numbers that go in our accounting system. And these are the general categories that we have, at least for now. So we do have to present a budget, but then again, we don't have to actually spend anything, and our budget can simply be zero. And that'll be up to you to think about, but we do have until July 24th in accordance with the budget guidelines that I sent out to all departments and all functional areas, that they have to be submitted by that date for consideration.
And Sean, the budget would be zero unless we make a recommendation for a project?
Right. If, let's say that you wanted to receive some legal advice, and we needed to put money in there to do that, we would put that amount in there. If we want to advertise for a project, we would put that in there. Other purchase services, let's say we wanted to hire a consultant or a contractor, that's what would come under that line, and we would put the appropriate dollar amount in there at that particular time.
Okay.
Debt service, principal and interest, that's obvious what that is. Purchase of land, building purchases, improvements, and then transfers to the general fund. And what that would be, if we're using in-kind other city services from other city departments, we would transfer that cost to those lines.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That's good to understand.
And I'm only the chair, but I mean, at this point, I see no expense that we should be budgeting for unless, Sean, there's something that you think that should be in there.
The only thing that I would suggest that we put in there, if we need to, and if we, the advisory board, agree with this, is that portion of the debt service, that delta between the new increment and the fall tax bill that goes out. We want to keep the increment, obviously, for this account, and then whether or not we want to use the difference, that artificial, I call it artificial difference, to offset the cost of the debt service for the tunnel project, which has been suggested by some.
The tunnel project. Okay. Tunnel. Got it.
And so we would need information about the debt service and how much that is and so on, and if we were going to make a recommendation on that.
Right, and we won't have that until after September 1st, because that's when we'll have the reval and we'll know what the delta is, what that number is. I mean, I've got the debt service for the tunnel project, but we're not going to be able to pay all of that with this money, even 1 year's debt service. So, and again, I would suggest that we keep the increment in this fund, and just that, what I call it, artificial hole that's been created in the general fund. If we're going to do it at all, that's my suggestion. That amount is the only amount that we use towards that debt service.
Right.
And Sean, is it a certainty that the delta will be to the positive?
Yes, because the increase in values of the sale of properties over the last 2 years we're looking at, again, a 10 or 20% increase in residential values and as much as 50% on commercial. So I definitely see a change in values in the.
Okay, so but are these are residential properties in the TIF district?
Yeah, throughout the city, but certainly within the TIF district as well.
Right, but I mean, do the changes in value throughout the city apply to the bottom line in the TIF fund?
No, No.
Okay.
It's just those properties that are within that TIF district.
Yeah. And then I was also wondering, I know housing values have actually gone up because of the scarcity of supply, but it seems to me, given the current economic climate and all the businesses that are either not currently paying their rent or going out of business, commercial property, if you were to base it on income and not the most recent sale price, could actually go down considerably in value.
The problem with that is, and Barry can tell you this, is the way that the revaluation is done based upon the guidelines issued by the state. It's the sales in the last 2 years. It's not recent activity.
Okay, so that applies to commercial property as well.
It does, but it brings up, I'm glad you brought that up because it presents another problem for us on this TIF advisory board. So what will happen is we will go and do that reval and we'll look at the sales in the last 2 years, and that will show a dramatic increase in properties. Then we will have folks that will file tax abatements, and we'll go through that whole twisted process. And by the time we get in front of the BTLA, the Bureau of Tax and Land Appeals, or the Superior Court, the court will say, well, wait a minute, properties are not what they used to be. How did you get those numbers? And of course, we followed the rules that you're required to follow. And that's when the issue for us on this TIF board is if they change those values, then we will lose increment. Right. And that's a problem for us.
Even with the increase in values, though, Sean, that would mean the tax rate goes down.
Right.
And so it's sort of that after the tax rate goes down with the assessments going up, then you look at the incremental increase of each tax property in the district. Correct?
Exactly. Okay. So the tax rate is likely to go down by a significant amount. But that doesn't mean that people are going to pay less taxes, of course. It just means the value of the base has changed. The value of your property has gone up. Right. But we still have to, we have the same amount of appropriations. Money has to be raised. So it just changes that landscape is what it does.
Right. Good. So in terms of any budgeting for debt service for the tunnel, if we recommend that, we really can't do that until September?
Right, we don't want to do that until then, until we know we have a good handle on the numbers, which means the budget process will already be submitted, which is fine. The council won't approve it till like December 18th or 19th, I forget which date it is this year. So we'll have to make some changes between now and the end of the process.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because you have a budget calendar also.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to ask if anybody had any other questions on the budget side of this, or if you had any further comments on it, Sean.
No, I just need to know what you want to do, if anything, at this point. My recommendation is we wait until September and we submit it at 0 for right now.
That would be my recommendation from what I understand here.
Thank you for making that motion, Victoria.
I'll second.
And who? Just say your name when you speak up.
Peter Owens will second the motion.
Peter, thank you. Okay. Chip, how do you? We'll vote and do the roll call.
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. Victoria.
I vote yes.
And Peter.
Yes.
Okay.
George is here too.
Excuse me?
George Sykes is attending the meeting as well.
George, good. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were on. Thank you.
That's all right. I think I have a vote in this matter at this point, so I would say yes.
Yes, no, you do. You've been very good.
Sorry, I'm so quiet. I clearly I've got that the problem, huh?
You've never had that problem, George. Well, thank you. Good to see you.
Nice to see you as well, Barry.
All right.
Okay.
So,
Sean,
yep.
go ahead.
I'm going to pull up the draft of the capital budget because it's just a draft, and let's see here. So don't pay too much attention to this because, like I said, it is a draft and it has a lot more work to be done.
Are you trying to tell us this is a draft, city manager?
Yes. I'm trying to make a clear indication to you that's exactly where we're at. All right. So let's look at the things that are going to apply to us. See, we don't have an airport in the middle of downtown. We can skip that.
Wow, this is pretty tough to read.
So there are
I'm
several.
See this because I'm on the phone, so remind me again, what is it you're showing us?
So what I want to show, I'm showing you a worksheet that is a draft of the capital projects that at least initially have been proposed for me to consider. And then what will eventually be provided to the council, of course, would be a very different thing.
Okay.
So I'm just going to talk about the applicable projects that are going on in the downtown, within the confines of the TIF district. I'm not suggesting we should be spending TIF money on these, but I just want you to know what's going on in the area that ultimately we're responsible for, or you're responsible for. And that's the Lebanon Library renovation. There's design going on right there, and there's a plan to move forward with construction on that. And that's one of the projects that I'm pretty solid on, that I'm going to be moving forward on. And I will also tell you this, I'm proposing a significantly smaller capital project budget over the next 6 years, and I'm aggregating it over 6 years for the first time. We've never had to do that before. We're in the post-CSO world, and we have to think differently. And what I'm doing is, because of the city's debt load, is I'm not proposing any more debt than what we're retiring, so at least it levels off. It won't get any worse than what it is. That's what my proposal is. Ultimately, it's up to the council how much it chooses to spend, but this is what I'm going to be recommending to, and there's some caveats with that. When I say that, any projects that the TIF board does would not fit within that. Any projects that actually fund themselves, like the streetlight project, would not fit within that $20.7 million over 6 years. Projects in the enterprise funds, that being water, sewer, airport, and solid waste, do not fit within that. We're talking about the general fund debt load. So the Lebanon Library renovation project would fit within that particular category. So that's one project that we have. City Hall renovations obviously fits within the TIF district. I'm not recommending any TIF funds be used for that purpose, but that falls within that. So we've done phase 1 and we're completing phase 2. We'll be done with that by the end of October. And then there's some additional work that's being proposed, much smaller projects to follow on after that. And if there's any questions about these as I go along, please do not hesitate to ask.
Actually, Sean, this is Chip. I just have a conceptual question. You were talking about the post-CSO world and the 6-year budget. I don't know what CSO is a reference to.
The combined sewer, that's the projects the city is doing for the
Got it.
Yeah, it's a $71 million project. We're under administrative mandate to do those. Okay. And where that really eats up the city's debt load.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the sewer project. I just didn't know the acronym. Thank you.
Yep. We're working on a community center project. It's uncertain where that's going to be located. That would be funded by grants and donations, just so you know, on that one. Fire equipment, we're not going to talk about. Okay, roads and bridges, Hanover Street reconstruction project, that fits solely within the TIF district. And that's
what street?
Hanover Street.
Oh, Hanover, okay.
So the intersection, when you come off of 120 there, where you have that T intersection, that's the start of where that project would begin. And down here to the Mascoma, where Mascoma intersects here, down by, or behind the building that I'm in right now, that intersection.
Right.
So the things that have been discussed with that would be to remove that T intersection and just reconfigure it. So when you're coming off of 120, you wouldn't come to a stop. You would have a turn and you would just keep going through, through the roadway without having to stop. The stop would be at the Hanover Street extension side of that. That was the original plan for that. And that's part of that Hanover Street in 2016 visioning study. And then when you,
right.
Yeah, and when you get to and then we would pave all of that section between there until you get to the intersection of High and Hanover Street. That's a rather confusing intersection, and a roundabout was proposed for that location.
There was a roundabout there many years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
And they finally had to get rid of it because it was more trouble than it was worth.
So that includes that intersection, and then down as you come up over where the tunnel is, the intersection where the insurance company is right there, that right behind my building here, that intersection is the end of that project. So that is in engineering design right now. I forget which firm we've assigned that to, but there's I think it's Wright Pierce, I think might have that one, engineering firm. So they're designing that right now. We're expecting more defined cost estimates probably mid-July. And again, I'm not anticipating that TIF funds would be used for that process. That would be funded by the general fund, and where any water or sewer work that has to go underneath those roadways will be done by those enterprise funds. That is just over a $4 million project right now, at least the estimate. That'll, again, be more refined by the middle of July, and we'll have better plans on that. And right now, it's unclear whether or not construction would begin in 21 or 22. So that's the Hanover Street project. Let's see. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The next thing is the Hanover Street Bridge. That really is what, you wouldn't know it any different. That's part of the tunnel. There's actually a bridge where 120 goes over that, or what's where the tunnel is located. We're not actually doing work on that right now. That bridge has to be done. That bridge will be done in 2023 or 24. And that's supposed to be funded 80% by the state and 20% by the city, although that doesn't happen anymore. It's never 80%. It's some lesser amount. It's just the way it's been working over the last 3 or 4 years. So that project is there. That's within our TIF district. Again, not recommending TIF funds for that. The Mechanic Street Slayton Road intersection, that is the very edge of our TIF district. That's scheduled for construction in 2029. It was taken off the 10-year highway plan and then subsequently added to that, but it's got a cap of $3 million some odd dollars. That's the entire amount for this region for that project, which won't even be about 60% of the cost. It's about a $5 million project to put that roundabout in, as well as the stone bridge will be removed and raised to allow buses and fire trucks and other large vehicles to be able to pass underneath, and two-way traffic to pass underneath. That's scheduled right now for 2029. Engineering is starting in 2025, but that again remains to be seen.
What is that intersection again?
Slayton Hill and Mechanic Street.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Like I said, that's at the very edge of our TIF district. And then we have the Spencer Street improvements. And I know, Victoria, you can't see this, but right now it looks at it's $662,000. That's for the roadway portion of that. And there's also a sewer and water portion of that. Total project is about $1.7 million. My plan for that is the sale of the old DPW facility. Right now, we've got, it was proposed that he would buy it for $1.5 million. That's Ken Braverman for his project. My plan is to take that cash and put that right into that road project. So we're matching public funds with private development at the same time and enhancing that entire neighborhood down there. We've got some serious drainage issues, and the water and sewer is very old that's in there. So we've replaced all those lines. So we're going to be short, at least for right now, by about $200,000. When we get the final cost, I'm sure it'll be different. But we're looking to do that project next year. And I will tell you, the projects we have gone out to bid, we have done exceptionally well. The project on Hillside Drive came in $500,000 less than what we had predicted it would be. We budgeted $1 million for sewer lining this year, and that project came in at $400,000, considerably below what we thought it was going to be. So we might be able to come under budget depending on how the bids go and construction work goes next year if everything goes as planned. But anyway, right now it's showing that we have to raise $200,000, and ultimately that will have to be decided where that money will come from. I don't recommend it come from the TIF. My recommendation is that it come from the general fund, and it's a mix with the water and sewer fund, depending upon what that is. That'll be my recommendation, because again, I want to save those monies for that public-private partnership that had been talked about in the 2016 study to enhance the economy of the city. All right, moving down the list. Let's see here, Miracle Miles outside. There's a rail trail paving project that's listed in here, and some of that does fit within the TIF district. And that is the Northern Rail Trail piece to go from the corner of Spencer Street, where it's presently dirt, behind the 20 Spencer Street project that we've got planned, all the way down to Bank Street. There's some serious drainage issues as you get down behind the old junior high school, and that would be addressed as part of that. And again, we'd pave it all the way down to like the other part of the Mascoma Greenway. That's a heavily used area right there, folks, to that Bank Street Extension neighborhood down there. So that's why that was proposed in there. And the rest are water and sewer fund projects, and they're not really particularly. You can see the Spencer Street improvements. That's the sewer portion of that and the water portion. So those are the projects that are planned at the present time. One of the things that I had told the council before is my focus, because I only have limited staff in the planning department, my focus was to move ahead with the West Lebanon improvements. That project has lingered for a long time, and I want to give that a jump start and get that going and get some real work done on that. So that is my plan for next year, and that will eat up the staffing that I have. So I don't have any plans to move forward any downtown redevelopment other than 20 Spencer Street. I think we need to get that project behind us. That's the first real project of its type the city's undertaken. We need to see that through and see how well that works before we tackle the bigger project that was at least envisioned in the visioning plan. But again,
Sean,
that's the thing. Yes.
What is the status of the Braverman project?
Right now, we've got pretty much the development agreement is at a draft that's just got a few fine details to work out. We made a slight change. I think you folks remember he was looking at like 10 units of affordable housing. We want to get 45% of those at affordable housing, and we think we have a plan in which to do that. So that would be a significant change. That would be about 45 units of affordable housing.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, that would be, and that's what we're working on. They call it LITAR. It's affordable housing without getting into the details. Workforce housing. That's a big change from the 9 or 10 units that we were looking at before to as many as 45, which we badly need in the city. Well, the whole state does. But anyway, we're pushing hard to get that done. So that's delaying things slightly to move forward with that. If we can accomplish that task, that would meet the city's bigger goals of dealing with the housing issue that we have.
How many total
So
units?
are you talking about, okay. Are you talking about workforce housing or affordable housing? Because I recall that we're talking about two different increments there. Affordable housing is what? I forget what the numbers were, 75% or 50% or 58% or something of market value, and workforce housing is 110% of market value or something.
It's not so much market value. It's 60 to 80% of the annual household income, the median household income in Grafton County.
Oh, that's how it should be based. Okay.
That's what our target is.
Mm-hmm.
And before, if you remember, Victoria, he was looking at those 10 units would be around 80%, 80 to 100%. And now we're looking at a certain number of those would be 60%, and a certain number would be 80% of the 45 units. We're looking at a total of like 90, anywhere between 91 and 98 units altogether. Right.
That's excellent.
Yeah, well, we're not there yet. So the developer's on board with it, but it's a state connection with the housing authority. We have to finalize that piece with it. And those funds are competitive. We've got a good project, we think, and we're in the process of trying to make that work. So that's our goal.
Great.
Hey, Sean, this is Chip.
Yes, Chip.
I just have a big picture question. This is not directly inspired by the details on this sheet. When is the tunnel project expected to be done, and what is the status of the Ledyard School building?
All right, so the tunnel project will be substantially complete by November, And then the spring, they'll have to do some plantings and things like that because it'll be too cold to do it by the time they get done the work this fall. And the project is on schedule. Of course, things can change, but right now it's on schedule like that. In terms of the Ledyard building, the last discussions I had with him, he was looking at developing the second story of that for some sort of restaurant or some sort of commercial activity to bring in rent money. And I don't know where he is at with that.
Okay, but his loan did go through for the school to buy the building.
You know, I don't know. We were talking about that from the, what was it? The Department of Agriculture there. The rural development. Yeah. That's who he was working through. And the last time I discussed it with him, he hadn't received that approval yet. He may have received that since then.
Okay.
All right. So those are the projects that we have right now. Any other discussions about any of that?
Yeah, the Lebanon Library Revitalization project, or is that one? I know a City Hall reno, you say no TIF funds would be used there. The Lebanon Library project, you said that's going to be going forward, so there would be no TIF funds used there, correct?
Well, that's not up to me. I mean, I'm suggesting that you don't use TIF funds for that purpose, but that's not the ultimate decision. Is up to the council at the end of the day, and whatever recommendation you folks choose to make on that. But the library project is a priority project for me. We'll have City Hall substantially done. There'll be smaller pieces, but I want to move on to the library and get that done because I've got fire stations behind that I've got to address.
Right.
So the library project is a priority project for me to get that in the process and get that project done.
Sean, this is Peter again. I wanted to sort of make a comment on the projects you've shared with us, which are very useful to know. But what I also hear you saying, and I think it's also my sense, is that while these projects are all really good projects in the downtown area, your thinking, and in fact the sort of history of thinking about the TIF project, is to really use it more strategically for a sort of major public-private partnership that grows the economy, as opposed to cherry picking bits of it to add to this project or that project. Do I understand your sense of that's what you represent as a sense of the TIF in general?
I'll go even further. That's my strong recommendation that that's how you do that. Because in my other work before I worked here, I did consulting. And Gardner, Maine is a perfect example of what happens when TIF money is not used appropriately. There are plenty of disasters across this country where the taxpayers are stuck. They don't produce any real value. Because they're not used properly. They're used more for political purposes. Gardner has a huge industrial park that they built, and they built it in hopes that they would come. Well, they didn't, and probably about a third of it has been actually leased out or sold out the properties, and the taxpayers are on the hook for the rest. It's been an abject disaster for them up there. And this is a little bit different down here, but I highly suggest that you use these public funds to try to entice folks to use private funds to enhance what's going to go on in the downtown area, to produce more taxable property, more commerce, more people who can live down here, hopefully affordable housing, or workforce housing. And then some commercial activity that goes along with that to spur more activity, more economic activity in our downtown area.
And that would be, I mean, I think that really is the spirit of the TIF tool in general, and I would strongly agree with that perspective.
So just a note here, Barry and I have to jump out to our next meeting here exactly at 7 or just before that. So we've got just a few minutes left to go. So I share with you the CIP projects as they are. And again, some of this is going to change. A lot of this is going to change between now and the time when I present it. So when I come back to you at our next meeting, which probably won't be, although it's up to Barry, it probably won't be until September, we'll have a more refined list and we'll go over that in more detail. And we'll have actually things to show you for the projects that will actually have some information about the Hanover Street project. You can actually look at some design plans, 30% design plans, things like that. So
and you'll also have tax assessment updates?
Yes, that's the key thing for us, is what those updates are going to look like.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Not here. Very good presentation.
Yes, thank you. I'm all
Yeah.
set.
Okay, if there's no other business, then nobody's business, or a motion to adjourn, and Sean and I can get a drink of water before we go to our next meeting.
This is
I
Chip.
make
I
a
move to
motion to-
adjourn.
Okay.
Thank you all for your time. It's
second the
really
motion.
appreciated. Thank you, Sean, for your preparation.
Yep, very well. Good job. Thank you.
Okay, so
We
you
have-
just,
We'll announce the next meeting. Sean, you'll set that up with
Yes.
the board. Good.
Yep. so Michelle, we're adjourning at 6:49 PM.
Great. Thank you.
Both very much.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Have a good night,
Yeah.
everybody.
Good night.
Night.